Here.
So while we're here, we're talking about the boring company project that we highlighted in the university's capacity study. Uh, the boring company is a tunneling company, so it kind of vertically integrated company that does a tunnel that has it's constructed sort of in the traditional boring fashion. If you've ever seen a tunnel boring machine, it looks like a big tube with a cutting head on the end, and it cuts a tube about a 14-foot diameter of an outside diameter, and then as the machine moves, it loads precast concrete sections that are 2 foot thick in a locking fashion that makes a tunnel. And then through the tunnel, they run electric Teslas, Model X's and Y's. And what did in kind of the feasibility studies, we took a look at a possibility, what we're calling the Aggy Loop. And we based the Aggy Loop on our two heaviest ridership routes, which are actually on-campus routes 1 and 3. Route 1's kind of the campus circulator, and Route 3 goes out towards the White Creek and comes back towards the MSC. And if you ever look at those two routes together, then you can and then look at the Aggy Loop, you can see sort of the genesis of that, which is basically linking the front of campus, this part of campus, with West Campus, with a major hub at the MSC. The Aggy Loop concept had about 9 stations in it, 3 of which were below ground and 3 of which were surface stations. And the concept is that you build the tunnels and you build the stations, and then you run this loop together. The way the loops are configured in the proposal is we kind of have a circle on this side of campus and a circle on that side of campus, on West Campus, and then link them together up in the area around the MSC. It's kind of so the loops themselves will be one direction with a bidirectional connection between them in order to be able to link them together. So it's kind of the big picture concept. It's if everyone's ever been out to Las Vegas, the boring company runs beneath the Las Vegas Convention Center and over to Resorts World International hotels with a set of tunnels where they move conventioneers from that hotel to the convention center. And evidently the convention, well, I've been out there, the convention center is huge. It's like a mile long, and so the convention center tunnel actually moves people from one end of the convention center to the other during those large type conventions. So that's kind of the background. I went out to Vegas a couple summers ago, so then summer of 2022, to take a look at what they were doing out in Vegas, and they were still building at that time, so we got to see it in full operation during a convention and see them construct some things. And then their headquarters is actually over in Bastrop, and so I've gone over to Bastrop and looked at some of their test tunnels that they do. The feasibility study, going back to routes 1 and 3, our transit system, that first couple of weeks of fall semester, we'll do 250,000 rides during the week on the total system, and routes 1 and 3 together are about 9,000 rides. And so we had some numbers that we needed to benchmark against to be able to determine the ridership. And their system is really kind of a math equation that's based around the number of vehicles in the system, the number of stops at the station, and sort of the length of the loops. I think the two loops together made about a little over a 4-mile loop, and we could run it probably with up to 60 vehicles in there at one time. So if you're below ground and the tunnels are down around 30 feet, that obviously there's no traffic, because you are the traffic, and can make it from one side of the campus to the other in about 4 minutes, running in the 40-mile-an-hour range. So there's kind of a little bit of an overview and background. So
What's the possible volume of passengers?
So we use those two routes. Those two routes, about 9,000 rides today, and we can max out at about 60 vehicles and carry about 3,300 passengers an hour.
That's what it would be
3,300 passengers an hour. So it exceeds what we're doing all day on those 2 routes. So that's where we kind of need to do the math on would it work.
So are you talking right there from the MSC up along the stadium, across Welborn, across the track? Is that what we're basically talking?
Yeah, so
What route would that be?
well, so Route 1 is our campus circulator route that does a big box around campus from Reed Arena, comes back around the front of campus, and then Route 3 goes from White Creek, actually out to the vet school, White Creek, back over to Reed, and then over to the MSC. And
Okay.
so those are the kind of the 2 areas.
What I'm asking is, if I were to take a picture above ground right now, which would be most representative of the traffic and the route that?
Like streetwise?
Yeah.
Or so I'm not sure I understand. So like
The above ground right now,
Okay.
what would be representative of the traffic that you're trying to solve with the tunnel?
Okay, let me say this way too. The routes for the tunnels that we looked at were actually based on the streets.
Okay.
Now, the reason is that if you've ever built anything on this campus, you know that if you've ever seen construction on this campus, there's a lot of piers underneath of all the buildings and all the facilities. So, as an example, the Polo Road parking garage and building has Argocast piers that are down 80 feet, and so we can't go underneath those. And so the routes with the tunnel routes, and you can see it in the capacity study, it's there, actually kind of goes up Ross Street and then cuts over towards the MSC, uses Stallings, goes over towards West Campus, underneath Welborn Road,
Yeah.
and then works its way between buildings and then out towards
Yeah,
White.
okay, so if I were just to get a shot of say, where the scooter routes and the walking routes go under the railroad tracks in there, that would be pretty representative.
Ish. Yep, generally speaking.
Awesome.
Yep.
So at what point during the capacity study did this even become part of the conversation and a thing that you or whoever brought to the table?
So when we talk about the capacity study, and if you've read it, if you haven't read it, I think it's a great document. Kind of gives an idea of what we're thinking about. It really calls out the issue that we're having from a mobility perspective on campus. Right, we have a kind of a physics problem. We can't get there from here in a 20-minute pass period. It's just borderline impossible to get from the front of campus to West Campus in 20 minutes anymore. So it take transporter kind of technology. We're in the same traffic that everybody else is, and we're dealing with all of those issues. And so, somebody said, "Well, how could you do it?" And we said, "Well, actually, we've been talking to the Boring Company and have done a feasibility study, and this is one way we think we could do it to be able to link Main and East and West Campus together across the tracks, across Welborn Road." And of course, there's an alternate in there as well, which is to build out West Campus. So about a third of our students are on West Campus right now, and so that the challenge there are academically housed on West Campus. So think about undergrads now at the Bush School and Poli-Sci, ag, business, some PAP with education that's over there. Core curriculum classes have to come back this way, and so we're having to move all those students back and forth. So what would happen, and this is what's in the capacity study, what would happen if you did some build out on West Campus? What happens if you added some dorms? So maybe those May students were housed there, added classroom buildings so that core curriculum could be taught on West Campus, and so you wouldn't necessarily need to move them back and forth. You have more student space, dining, rec, or something like all those kind of amenities that need to go along with it, and then not have to move those students back and forth. So that's also in there.
Go ahead, you got it.
This sounds like a farther out question, but where would the money, where are you guys kind of proposing the money will come from? Is this an endowment sort of?
No, it's,
issue, or?
anytime that we look at these large capital projects like this, be it a new building for any program or a department or anything like that, we have a process that we go through internally to get those projects on a list, to rank those projects, to then have discussions around funding sources and things like that. And so those funding sources, typically for a large project like an academic building, could be the permanent university fund, any debt capacity we have, gifts, endowment, on and on and on, in order to be able to do something like that. So this could be the same sort of thing. Currently it's not on that list, and it is a big dollar project. It would be in the realm of giant building on campus. It is, dollar-wise, it would probably be bigger than anything that we've built recently.
What is your timeline as far as like next steps going forward?
Haven't gotten there.
Uh-huh.
We're coming through the capacity study process, which was out for feedback, and soliciting feedback on the capacity study. Team was looking at tweaking any recommendations that were in there, or adding any sort of clarifying points in there. But as it stands today, the boring company recommendation that's in the capacity study is still there.
So there's obviously a lot of things that need to happen before this can even become a reality. Like, how realistic is this project as it stands currently?
Sure. And so I think what we did was, in coming through last year, we kind of wrapped it up at the end of 23. It was a feasibility study to see, could it be done, right? So do the numbers match up for transit ridership, and does that translate to the ridership that the boring company could provide for those two routes being linked together to be able to replace that? And that was a yes. Do we have the subterranean capacity? If we go down 30 feet, can we get between buildings? Where can we go in order to be able to create this loop to be able to link Main and West? And that was a check as well. To be able to talk about the stations. And the stations are a big deal. The ones above ground are not that big of a deal. They could be done in an area from here to here kind of thing. But the subterranean stations are a really big deal. They're a big open cut box that is essentially bridged over, and that's a really big hole, deep hole. And think about, it's almost like building a building underground, and those stations that are underground take an awful lot of planning and an awful lot of time to be able to do it. And frankly, the station piece might be as long as the boring piece. So it's kind of a long way to say it's feasible, which is what we said in the capacity study. So now we just kind of have to start vetting with the campus about which direction we think we want to go. Do we want to try to figure out a way to link West and Main, or do we want to move physical facilities over and build out West Campus as a solution? So I think that's kind of what we're thinking about doing now.
Do you have any other alternatives that you're kind of sussing out right now?
Zip lines.
Fun.
No, not. The short answer is not really. The capacity study does add, suggesting adding to our transit fleet by about 10% to bump up the size, but we're in that same traffic, and we have those same kind of issues that it's very hard to get from here to there in 20 minutes. One of the ideas in the capacity study is suggests an offset from a schedule offset, maybe between Main and West, to help with that as well. So, but from a mobility perspective, if you take a look in there, it basically says that there is no silver bullet to this solution. It's going to take a whole bunch of different pieces of the puzzle being put together in order to be able to have a comprehensive solution.
Can we talk about the potential impacts this will have on the surrounding streets, taking traffic off of those?
Well, yeah, the hope would be that we'd be able to reallocate the transit resources from routes 1 and 3. So the loop is based on those two routes, and so that you could reallocate those resources from them. But the route does go up Ross Street, so does Route 1, and we'd be below Ross Street. So hopefully those buses would come off of that. If you've seen Ross Street at class change, it's like Manhattan. There's so much traffic and movement that comes around at that time. Really what we'd be removing some bus traffic from those routes, but I think that it would make getting from one side of campus to the other in all weather a lot easier. So you could see that you could removing bike ped traffic that would then choose to ride a different mode of transportation if that was really convenient for them. So you could see something like that happen. We didn't really kind of take a hard look at so what that traffic offset would be, though, but being based on the bus routes and those bus routes being reallocated someplace else, then there should be a reduction in traffic just based on the buses alone and the ridership.
From our research, no university has taken on a project like this. What does it mean for you all to potentially raise?
I think that's kind of where we originally kind of went with this. It was sort of a way outside the box idea to a very complex solution. It was a out of the box idea for a really complex problem. And again, it would be a part of the puzzle. Route-wise, it would handle 2 routes, out of the more than a dozen that we have. But I think that's kind of where we're going, where it's sort of like almost like a moonshot kind of thing. That if you wanted to move the needle, if you wanted to make a difference, if you actually wanted to not just add more buses and sit in more traffic and take the same amount of time to get there, if you really wanted to try something different, this is way outside the box.
And have you guys considered any safety concerns in the feasibility study, or is that going to be kind of?
Well, so we had a lot of questions about that, about how things work. It's a closed system, so not anybody can go in there. So it's just the operations, which would be operated by the boring company, their vehicles, their drivers. And so when we were out in Vegas and looked at it, one of the big things, sort of like in Vegas, it never rains in Vegas, right? We certainly get rain and things like that here. What happens when rain infiltrates the system? And so the day before we were in Vegas, they had a monsoon, and so had a deluge of rain. So no water was in the system. Of course, there are pumps and things like that to be able to remove the water. Every inch of the Vegas tunnel is monitored by cameras. With whenever the system is running, there's dispatchers. When I'm not saying like there's a gap between here and here in the camera system. It's continuous of the system to its entirety to see where all the vehicles are at all times. There are regulations actually about kind of like air and safety hatches to be able to get out if you don't have a certain distance between stations. There could be a mid-station like fire exit, so to speak, and so that's been taken into consideration. We actually would have to have one of those based on the spacing of the different stations that we have. They say they have a stellar safety record. I haven't seen a problem, so to speak, or something like that. The vehicles are not autonomous; they're driver driven. I think over time, the tunnel becomes the mechanism to be able to look into the future for different modes or different ways to operate the system, or even different vehicles over time. Maybe something a little bit bigger than a four-door vehicle.
On a personal note, what does it mean for you to be able to spearhead a project like this?
I think it's kind of cool, right? You're talking about something that's really different. That's really on the cutting edge of mobility and transportation. It is, obviously it would be a massive project, the size of this community hasn't seen, and actually, come to think of it, you probably wouldn't see very much of it because most of it would be underground. But it'd be really special.
Is this a project that would require conversations from higher up, maybe at the system level, regions?
Keep going.
Okay.
Keep going. Yeah, absolutely.
Have you even reached that point where you even have had any conversations with people of those levels?
No.
Okay.
No. Capacity study was really its debutante ball.
And is President Welsh accepting recommendations this month, or is there a timeline on that? Maybe that's a question for
For
Kelly.
the capacity study,
Yes.
I think we just came off a month of comment period, and it closed about a week, 10 days ago or something like
They
that.
said by the end of the month or early November.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next few weeks.
So those recommendations are being incorporated now from the research group back to kind of to finalize the report based on the feedback and the comments and things like that.
Has the boring company done any other projects kind of at this scale other than the one in Vegas,
Just that one. Yep. Yep.
You haven't brought up unpopular ideas like extending the school day, the business day, restricting traffic on campus. I'm guessing all that was incorporated in this.
So in the capacity study in the mobility section did talk a little bit about further restricting traffic on campus. Not in necessarily any big way, but maybe over on Ross Street where we do have an open section to be able to close Ireland and Asbury potentially, to be able to tighten that up a little bit more. From a class schedule standpoint, the offset was really the kind of the piece that was in there rather than extending the day. The day's pretty extended already. Labs go way into the evening. Just for capacity of classrooms already, it could go into the 9 o'clock hour actually.
I've heard meetings though where the unpopular 7 and 8 o'clock classes on Mondays and Fridays, maybe even into the weekends.
Yeah, and no talk of doing anything on the weekends through the capacity study.
Any other questions? Now's your chance.
Is there anything that we didn't ask that you think is important?
No, I think sort of what I kind of laid out the first part of it. I kind of hit on all those kind of the high points of it.
Peter, you've been here for how long?
21 years.
So when you first came here and now, kind of describe what the traffic was like, not just automobiles, but pedestrian, scooters, skateboards.
Yeah, it is. It's way different. And I think when I set foot on campus in 03, the student body was in the upper 40s, 48 or something like that, 49 at some time, and now we're in the 72, 75 range, and so that's a big jump, and we feel it in that the campus hardscape infrastructure, sidewalks, and road network is not too terribly different. There are some notable improvements, like over at the MSC with 30-foot sidewalks and the redo of that area, Polo Road with increased shared use paths and things like that. But there wasn't maybe a few skateboards back in the day, but there were certainly no electric scooters or unicycle thingies that go 40 miles an hour, or e-bikes or things like that. We didn't have our own bike share system. There was a lot of cyclists on campus still, but the mobility picture was way different than it was then. That was in 2003. We opened the Welborn Road grade separation, now called the Pickard Pass, just opened, followed in 2012 by the Old Main grade separation. And so things have changed, but man, oh man, it's class change can look like a scene out of Mad Max or something. It's lots of mobility options that are coming at you.
Would you happen to know how the physical footprint has grown? Is that something offhand like the percent growth or anything?
Like the built environment, a
yes.
number of buildings. We could get that. I don't know it off the top of my head of this like total square footage today versus then of the buildings, but we could get that, because things like liberal arts and humanities weren't here. That's a big building, or ILSB or LSQ or ETB, or Zach was a fraction of the size that it is now, and so there has been an awful lot of growth in the physical environment, built environment as well. But we can get that.
One more question. This is obviously further away. Are y'all looking at anything more immediate to implement to address the capacity concerns?
Well, I think that the big issue in the capacity study, the big recommendation is to pause growth for 5 years to kind of hold where we are and give ourselves a little bit of time to breathe. And so during that time, if we're able to increase the size of the transit fleet, if we're able to build some amenities on West Campus, if we're able to look more critically at a project like we've been talking about, then I think that there'll be some things like that. One of the shortest term things is that we're going to be adding a lane to Pemberthy Drive, which is on the west side of Reed Arena, or the back side of Reed Arena, to match up with the 4 lanes that are on the city side, to bring that into campus so it'll look more like Olson Boulevard or Kimbrough. It'll also have a nice shared use path on either side as well, as we start to see the to making biking and walking from that kind of apartment triangle over towards Holloman a little bit more accessible to campus. Part of that is in reaction to the Bush-Wilburn grade separation project, which is coming down the pipe in the next few years, and so that is a large, impactful project that will need a little bit of capacity to get around it during its construction.
And Berkeley's projected for,
They're in design now, and they would like to have it finished before Bush-Welburn.